We are less than a week away from Wimbledon, and so far, the lead-up grass tournaments have already delivered more than they promised. Shots of the year and impossible highlight reels. Crazy upsets. We witnessed incredible action from both tours, but off the courts, it was a different story altogether. From the 4 ongoing tournaments to some controversial, high-profile withdrawals from the Olympics, and the heated arguments about some rule changes, here's everything that happened in tennis last week. The top seeds in Halle all had big wins against their opponents in the round of 32. Well, except for Andrei Rublev, who lost to Marcos Giron in straight sets. Rublev is now 3-3 since his Madrid title, and he's still not looking good at the moment. Rublev followed his horror show at Roland Garros with some reactions that weren't necessarily better in his loss to Giron. Watching the match, I felt like Rublev attempted way too many winners off the back foot, which only led to many unforced errors. Also, Rublev was a disappointing 23% on first serve return points won. At the same time, Giron capitalized on the Russian's weak second serve, winning more than a dozen points off those serves. I don't know if it's too early to say this, but Rublev making it past the quarterfinals at Wimbledon would be shocking, just based on his recent form and mental state. Meanwhile, Felix Auger-Aliassime then had to retire against Germany's Dominik Koepfer because of an injury, which was such a bummer. But then came the round of 16 with even more surprises for us. Zhang Zhizhen took down the 3rd seed Medvedev in a 3-set thriller for his 3rd top 10 win. Zheng's ground strokes were solid that day, and the forehand was doing all the damage. Down 1-4 in the 3rd set tiebreak, Zheng's confidence never dipped, and in the end, he got a well-deserved win. I haven't watched too many of Zhang's matches myself, but judging from what I have seen, he definitely has top 20 potential. But in my opinion, the match of the round was the Zverev-Sonego match. Now, because I'm still waiting on the ATP, I won't be able to go deep into some of those rallies without the clips. But overall, the match was high quality, with Sasha once again doing what he knows how to do best: putting on a serving clinic. Zverev only lost a combined 8 points on both his first and second serves. How do you beat a player who's unplayable on the serve? Although Sonego raised his level and was playing high-quality tennis himself, it fell just short against the German. In the Zverev deep dive I made a few days ago, I talked about some of the changes he made to his game, particularly on his serve. Once again, we saw how that came into play against Sonego. But while Sasha was giving us a serving masterclass, Chris Eubanks was busy taking down defending champion Alexander Bublik in 3 sets. Bublik paid the price for being wasteful on breakpoint chances. He was 2 for 16. At the end of the day, the defending champion's 22 aces couldn't get him over the line. Meanwhile, top seed Jannik Sinner had no problems booking his ticket to the quarterfinal, despite losing a tiebreak for the 2nd time in the tournament, this time against Fabian Marozsan. But let's talk about Jan-Lennard Struff for a second. We saw quite the performance from him against Tsitsipas, who he's now beaten 4 times in his career. 22 winners, only 5 unforced errors, no breakpoints faced. Struff probably has Tsitsipas' number, some would argue, but what can't be argued is the 34-year-old's excellent ball striking ability. The guy is such a powerhouse, and let me tell you, despite his age, he can definitely be a real threat on grass. How far do you see him going at Wimbledon? Well, someone I didn't see reaching the later rounds of Halle was Marcos Giron. He's a great player, no doubt, but he came into the event having lost 8 of his last 10 matches, a number of those against opponents who he had the game to beat. But after taking down Rublev and Berrettini before falling short against Hurkacz, Giron will no doubt be proud of himself. The semis in Halle played out as predicted. Zhang saw his good run ended by Sinner, while Alexander Zverev, whose worst surface is grass, fell just short against an in-form Hurkacz. With that, the stage was set for the final. Sinner and Hurkacz both served lights out in the final, making it impossible for either player to be broken. However, Sinner reminded everyone that his serve could be a real weapon on grass. The Italian won 44 out of 47 first serve points, about 94%, and was also above 70% on the second serve win percentage. That was something Hurkacz couldn't replicate. He only managed to win 9 out of 23 points on his second serve, no thanks to some insane returning level from Sinner. One way Sinner showed he was the superior player was by neutralizing Hurkacz's firepower with an impressive counter-attacking running forehand on many occasions. At the end of the day, Sinner got the job done after 2 tiebreaks to become just the 8th man in ATP history to win a title in his first tournament as world number 1. It's also a first grass title for Sinner and his 4th title of the year. What a way to prepare for Wimbledon. Elsewhere at the Queen's Club Championships, we saw Tommy Paul become the first American to win the tournament since Sam Querrey did it in 2010. Paul, who's now the new American #1 for the first time in his career, has had one heck of a season. Despite the Australian Open disappointment in January and those ankle injury setbacks, Paul has been having quite a season, and we might need to do a deep dive on him soon. Following his semifinal loss to Medvedev, Paul's ankle stopped him from doing anything in Miami, and he didn't even play Monte Carlo. He then reached a second Masters 1000 semifinal of the year in Rome. Let's not forget that he won the Dallas Open in February and reached the final at Delray Beach, and has now followed that up with the biggest title of his career. Paul entered the tournament as the 5th seed, with Alcaraz, de Minaur, Dimitrov, and Taylor Fritz all ahead of him. Despite the top seeds falling off, Paul remained impressive all week, dropping only one set the entire tournament. I always found it weird that a player with Tommy Paul's potential only had 2 ATP 250 titles to show for it, but it was only a matter of time before the bigger titles would come. Paul played with a lot of intensity and aggression throughout the tournament. But while his flat and low backhand was every bit as difficult for his opponent to handle as usual, I particularly loved his running cross-court forehand. You could see on numerous occasions how it kept him in so many points, particularly against Musetti in the final. Paul's court coverage was exceptional on defense, and when it came to offense, the American was clutch with an excellent transition game and net attack. For Musetti, he'll be proud of how he performed from the baseline all week from an offensive power standpoint. With a lot of steam on his ground strokes and remarkable change in direction even when out of position, you can tell that he has the firepower to take down big names on grass, where defensive options are somewhat limited. His wins against Alex de Minaur and Jordan Thompson were especially impressive to me. But let's talk about the top seed Alcaraz, who was the upset of the tournament. I thought it was one of those matches where your opponent was just better on the day. However, Alcaraz sort of complained after the match that he felt like he was being rushed on his serve, and that affected him. Listen to this.
I feel like I can ask for the balls. It's something is crazy. I have time just to ask for 2 balls and no bounces. I think I've never seen something like that in tennis.
Alcaraz is clearly not a fan of the new serve clock rules that were tested out last week. The new rule allows the shot clock to start right when the previous point finishes, and not after the umpire calls the score. On the one hand, this reduces the time spent between points and also reduces subjectivity because there are umpires that are a lot more strict with the clock. You still get the 25 seconds, it just starts counting immediately. Alcaraz felt like his pre-serve routine was affected, but a few fans thought he was just complaining because he lost. But looking at the rule, do you think it makes sense? Imagine there's a 40 or 50 shot rally and you don't even get to take a breather. The clock starts counting right away. On a lighter note, I'm not sure how players with extensive pre-serve rituals like Rafa would have coped with this one. He probably would have gotten a lot of time violations. Djokovic also sometimes bounces the ball a lot before serving too. Personally, I think many players will be uncomfortable with it at first, but over time we'll see adjustments. Some fans believe it doesn't make sense to have the same amount of time between all points, since some points are very long while others are short, and I also think that's a valid point. I'll leave it at that. Talking about some of our favorite Americans. Shelton saw an early exit at Queens against Perricard and is now 0-2 on the grass this season at the time of this recording. He'll look to find a winning start to his grass season in Mallorca this week. I have to note that I think he still has a steep learning curve on grass, so I don't have high expectations, but you have to like what you see out of his game, with the big serve and forehand that should play pretty well on the surface. For Korda, he got his first top 10 win of the year, beating Dimitrov in the round of 16. This follows an impressive final run in Sertogenbosch last week. I believe that grass is going to reward Korda's offensive style of play and baseline aggression a lot more in the coming seasons, starting from now. For Fritz, he's currently aiming for the hat trick as the top seed in Eastbourne. He has a 9-2 record across 4 appearances at the 250, lifting the trophy in 2019 and in 2022. I think he reaches the quarterfinal again at Wimbledon this year. But for Francis Tiafoe, hopefully that nasty fall that forced him to retire against Hijikata is nothing too serious. But I think it's a no-brainer to not expect anything from him at this point. The guy is still searching. He's lucky to be seeded for Wimbledon. By the way, some records were smashed at Queens last week. Milos Raonic broke the record for most aces ever in a best-of-3 sets match after serving 47 aces against Cam Norrie in the round of 32. The previous record was held by none other than Ivo Karlovic, who had 45. Raonic didn't get a main draw wildcard into Wimbledon and has decided to not play qualies either. We'll touch on some of the controversies surrounding the Wimbledon wildcards later in the video, but for now, all the drama is about the Olympics. Russia is sending a pretty strong group of players to the Olympics, with Medvedev, Kotov, Safiullin, and Karatsev all competing on the men's side. On the women's side, we have Mira Andreeva, Alexandrova, Kudermetova, and Schneider. They'll all compete under neutral flags. But the talking point, however, is about the withdrawal list. There's an air of uncertainty around why Rublev, Khachanov, and many other stars aren't going to be in Paris. For Rublev, the word on the street is that he's looking after his health and that he needs to take a breather. But then Daria Kasatkina, Anna Kalinskaya, Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, and Anastasia Potapova won't be competing as well. Arina Sabalenka also confirmed that she won't be playing in the Olympics either. Here's what she said. Quote, "I'm not going to play in the Olympics because of all the rules from the WTA with mandatory tournaments. I have to sacrifice something. Unfortunately, I have to sacrifice the Olympics. At this stage of my career, and especially with all the struggles I've had the last months, I need to take care of my health." End quote. Some fans didn't buy that WTA mandatory line from Sabalenka, even saying that she didn't want to participate for political reasons. But then we saw Emma Raducanu snub the tournament, saying that the Olympics just weren't right for her this time of year. Quote, "I guess with the change in surface, it's just not worth the risk for me at this point, having recovered from surgeries last year." End quote. She subsequently turned down the wildcard she'd been given. Meanwhile, Madison Keys, Ben Shelton, Sebastian Korda, and Frances Tiafoe all opted not to play the Olympics in Paris, despite being top 4 players in the United States. They'll be replaced by Marcus Giron, Chris Eubanks, and Emma Navarro. For Ben Shelton, it seemed to be the right decision, given that he's been injured. Ons Jabeur also announced that she won't be going to Paris either. Now, there is an argument that many of these top players don't care about the Olympics because there isn't really anything at stake. No ranking points, no significant prize money, and no real incentives other than the fact that they get to represent their country. Do you think that this is selfish? I personally don't think so. I think the top reason for many players missing out is actually the surface change. You see, for the first time since 1992, the Olympics will be played on clay. Now, you throw in the fact that the players just came from clay, have gone to grass, and will be about to go to the hard court swing, and it just isn't really the easiest adjustment to make. Talking about injury concerns, we now know that 7-time champ Novak Djokovic has arrived at Wimbledon. His participation, however, is still not 100% certain. Elsewhere, Karolina Muchova returns to the courts after almost a year. But the pain continues for Yuri Lehechka, who in addition to missing out on Roland Garros, will also not play at Wimbledon. He won't even recover in time for the Olympics, which is such a shame because he was playing the best tennis of his life in Madrid before suffering a stress fracture in his back. Meanwhile, Andy Murray, who played his 1000th ATP match last week, had to retire due to injury in the second round. Murray then proceeded to have surgery done for a spinal cyst. However, the details of his medical status were supposed to be kept confidential by Simon Briggs, but it was leaked and further announced that he won't be participating at Wimbledon. His mother, however, put up this tweet. As far as ranking updates go, Novak Djokovic returns to the number 2 spot after Alcaraz failed to defend his championship points at Queens. Meanwhile, Alex de Minaur sees his career-high rank of number 7 to be short-lived, and we now know that he won't be a top 8 seed at Wimbledon. Alexander Bublik drops outside the top 20 after failing to defend his title in Halle. Jack Draper, Zheng Jizhen, and Mapechi Pericard all hit new career highs. And then we have Rinky Hijikata, who's one of the biggest movers of the week. Turning our attention to the WTA, there are no changes in the top 10. However, Victoria Azarenka is up 3 spots to 16, while Anna Kalinskaya has now broken into the top 20 for the first time after reaching the final in Berlin. Meanwhile, Donna Vekic failed to defend her finalist points from Berlin last year, so she falls 10 spots off and down to number 41. Caroline Dolehide is one of the biggest movers of the week as she eyes a return to the top 50. Elsewhere, former world number 2 Petra Kvitova, who announced her pregnancy earlier this year, drops more than 70 spots and now falls outside the top 100. We had some major news off the courts as well. Roger Federer's iconic promo made an appearance in Times Square with Kid Roger playing against the Maestro. 12 Final Days is already streaming on Prime Video. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. Also, Rafa is set to open a Rafael Nadal Sports Center in Albania. The Sports Center will be located next to Manchester City's new football center in the city of Durrës. And stepping up his game as a fashion icon, Casper Ruud was announced as an ambassador for Dior. Checking in on the WTA Tour, we saw two tournaments play out, the Rothsay Classic and the Berlin Open. The wait for her first WTA Tour level title continues for Ajla Tomljanovic. Although she reached the final at the Rothsay Classic, Yulia Putintseva was too hot for her to handle. Putintseva got the early break before doubling down to race to a 5-1 lead in the first set, and here's how she closed it out.
Oh, and that sums up.
The second set threatened to follow the same pattern, but Ajla raised her level to recover from going down an early break. The set subsequently went to a tiebreak. Despite saving a number of championship points, Ajla ended up losing 6-1, 7-6. She only won 26% of her second serve points, and that proved to be a major problem for her throughout the match, as her opponent was locked in on the return. Switching over to Berlin, we were in for a lot of surprises, or should I say disappointments. Sabalenka, Rybakina, and Ons Jabeur all retired from their quarterfinal matches due to physical problems. However, Jessica Pegula, who missed the entire European clay season, won the WTA 500 title after saving 5 match points against Anna Kalinskaya in the final. It's Pegula's first title since October last year, and her first career title on grass. Watching her performance last week, I think that she can put herself among the top contenders for the Wimbledon title. The Berlin title will no doubt give her much-needed confidence. Wimbledon's initial wildcards came out a couple days ago, and here they are on the screen. And, Jannik Thiem might miss out on the tournament in his last year on tour. Meanwhile, Naomi Osaka, Angelique Kerber, Wozniacki, and Emma Raducanu have all been given wildcards too. No wildcard for Simona Halep, who might not be match fit just yet. Looking back at the men's singles, some fans noticed that all the initial wildcards were given to mostly less experienced British players, which didn't make sense for some. But let me get this out of the way. Wildcards aren't meant to be fair. They're solely at the discretion of the tournament officials. Now, we all want to see some of our favorite players in these tournaments, but I bet you'd see arguments made on both sides if Jannik Thiem should suddenly be given a wildcard to a tournament where he always lost in the first or second round, even in his prime. Yes, there's the exception in 2017 where he reached the 4th round, but Thiem has a 42% win percentage at Wimbledon, so it's easy to see why some fans don't really care if he gets in or not. Personally, I think it's a good idea for some young and upcoming players to be given these wildcard opportunities. Ultimately, I think wildcards should go to players who the organizers think could bring more intrigue to the event, but I'm eager to know what's on your mind. What are your thoughts about wildcards? Last week in tennis was a spectacle on and off the court, and with Wimbledon right around the corner, you can expect a double dose of action and drama. If you liked this video, you should definitely check out the deep dive I just did on Alexander Zverev, where I analyze and break down his game in ways that you probably haven't seen on YouTube before. It should be showing on the screen for you right here, and until next time, keep going for the lines.